Searchlight. It's easy to tell when it's winter in Wyoming. There is snow on everything: the trees, the houses, the roads, the fields, and even the people if they stay outside long enough. It's not a dirty snow, it's a clean, soft snow that rests like blankets over the entire state. The air is clear and crisp, and the rivers are all frozen. It's fun to be outdoors and see the snowflakes float down past the brim of your hat and hear the squeak of the fresh powder under your boots. Winter in Wyoming can be the most beautiful time of the year if you're ready for it. Little Willie was ready. He had chopped enough wood; they would not be cold. He had stocked enough food; they would not go hungry. He asked Lester at the general store how much food Grandfather had bought last year. Then he had purchased the same amount. This would be more than enough because Grandfather wasn't eating very much these days. The coming of the snow as early as October also meant the coming of school. But little Willie didn't mind. He liked school. However, his teacher, Miss Williams, had told Grandfather once, "Far as I'm concerned, that boy of yours just asks too many questions." Grandfather had just laughed and said, "How's he going to learn if he don't ask?" Then later, Grandfather had said to little Willie, "If your teacher don't know, you ask me. If I don't know, you ask the library. If the library don't know, then you got yourself a good question." Grandfather had taught little Willie a lot, but now little Willie was on his own. Each morning he would get up and make a fire. Then he would make oatmeal mush for breakfast. He ate it, Searchlight ate it, Grandfather ate it. He would feed Grandfather a spoonful at a time. After breakfast, little Willie would hitch up Searchlight to the sled. It was an old wooden sled that Grandfather had bought from the Indians. It was so light that little Willie could pick it up with one hand. It was strong and sturdy. Little Willie rode on the sled standing up, and Searchlight would pull him 5 miles across the snow-covered countryside to the schoolhouse, which was located on the outskirts of town. Searchlight loved the snow. She would wait patiently outside the schoolhouse all day long, and little Willie never missed a chance to run out between classes and play with his friend. After school, they would go into town of Jackson and run errands. They would pick up supplies at Lester's general store and go to the post office or go to the bank. Little Willie had $50 in a savings account at the bank. Every month, Grandfather had deposited the money little Willie had earned working on the farm. "Don't thank me," Grandfather would say. "You earned it. You're a good little worker, and I'm proud of you." Grandfather wanted little Willie to go to college and become educated. All little Willie wanted to do was grow potatoes, but he respected his grandfather enough to do whatever he said. If there were no errands to run that day, Searchlight would just pull little Willie up and down Main Street. Little Willie loved to look at all of the people, especially the city slickers, as Grandfather called them. "Why, they don't know a potato from a peanut," Grandfather said, "and their hands were as pink and soft as a baby's." You couldn't miss the city slickers. They were the ones who looked as if they were going to a wedding. At a little before 6 each day, little Willie would position his sled in front of an old church on Main Street. Today again he waited, eyes glued on the big church clock that loomed high overhead. Searchlight waited too, ears perked up, eyes alert, legs slightly bent, ready to spring forward. Bong! At the first stroke of 6, Searchlight lunged forward with such force that little Willie was almost thrown off from the sled. Straight down Main Street they went, the sled's runners barely touching the snow. They were one big blur. They turned right onto North Road, and they were almost out of town before the church clock became silent again. "Go Go, Searchlight, go! Little Willie's voice sang out across the snowy twilight. And did Searchlight go? She had run this race 100 times before, and she knew the whereabouts of every fallen tree and hidden gully. This enabled her to travel at tremendous speed, even though it was getting dark and more dangerous. Little Willie sucked in the cool night air and felt the sting of the wind against his face. It was a race, all right, a race against time, a race against themselves, a race they always won. The small building up ahead was Grandfather's farmhouse. When Searchlight saw it, she seemed to gather up every ounce of her remaining strength. She forged ahead with such speed that the sled seemed to lift up off the ground and fly. They were so exhausted when they arrived at the house that neither of them noticed the horse tied up outside. Little Willie unhitched Searchlight, and then both of them tumbled over onto their backs in the snow and stared up at the moon. Searchlight had her head and one paw on Little Willie's chest and was licking the underside of his chin. Little Willie had a hold of Searchlight's ear, and he was grinning. The owner of the horse stood on the front porch and watched them, tapping his foot impatiently.